The Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
If you recall last week, the reading from the epistle reminded us that in Christ we are made new. And this morning we hear that echo in the words of the prophet Isaiah, the prophet who heralds that God makes all things new. That seems to me to be a warning that we should expect the unexpected, especially from God. Our gospel today comes from John. And what happens in this reading happens right before Jesus enters Jerusalem for Holy Week. Next week, we celebrate Palm Sunday. But for today, we are in the town of Bethany, just a few miles from Jerusalem. And if we pay close attention, we realize we are in the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha. It's the week before Passover. Jesus has gathered with his disciples and friends, and Mary and Martha are giving a dinner to celebrate the raising of Lazarus. That context is really important. Remember, originally the Gospels had no chapters or verses, so what happens immediately before this is that Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead, and that caused the temple authorities to let it be known to all that they were seeking to arrest Jesus. This gospel wants us to know at this point that the end is near. And it's hard to ignore that just before Mary anoints Jesus, Lazarus was raised from the tomb. He had been in the tomb for 4 days, and when Jesus arrived to them, Mary and Martha tried to warn him not to go to the tomb. They reminded him of the stench that was there. The stench. In her commentary on the Gospel of John, Caroline Lewis points out that the smell is important in chapter 11, there's the stench of death. But here in chapter 12, we find Jesus, Mary, and Martha, and Lazarus at a dinner party. And it's at that party where we find another smell. It's the smell of nard. Now, nard was an ointment that came from a plant that was native to India. It was expensive. It may have traveled a long distance to get there. It was something special, something that would have been reserved for a special occasion. Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. So it makes sense that Lazarus' sister would anoint Jesus, would anoint him with something very precious and honorable and pungent. Really, how else do you thank somebody who has raised your brother from the dead? For the sisters, their brother was their economic survival in the world. What else could Mary have done to honor Jesus? And in this context, it's almost natural to think that Mary had this ointment on hand because she bought it to anoint her own brother at his death, which had happened just a week or so before. Now, in all the Gospels, Jesus is anointed by a woman at a dinner party. But only in the Gospel of John is that woman named as Mary of Bethany. And that's important because this Gospel tells us that Mary of Bethany was a woman of means. Their family had enough money to hire professional mourners when Lazarus died. And it's only here in this Gospel that the act of anointing becomes a commentary on the preciousness of Jesus' life and the economics of what you are to do when you realize that it's God sitting in the chair next to you. Now, in the Gospel of John, there are 7 signs that teach us that Jesus is divine. The raising of Lazarus is the 7th. And somehow, Mary of Bethany is the only one who seems to have understood yet. In every gospel account when Jesus is anointed, Judas complains that the money could have been better spent. And perhaps it's true we should not forget this nard cost 300 denarii. A denarii was the wage of an average laborer. So that's almost a year's wage. Here in Wyoming, our minimum wage is $7.75. So I did the math. Someone working for minimum wage full-time for 300 days would make about $8,600. So 300 denarii is equivalent to $8,600. And Mary pours all of that on the feet of Jesus. The pungent smell of the nard fills the entire house and likely becomes the focus of the party. A party Mary has thrown, by the way. Now, if I'm being really honest, I have to say I understand Judas's reaction. We know there are people in our community with real needs. And I thought about $8,600 this week. That's enough to run St. Christopher's Highway for 2 months, maybe a little more, depending on the weather. It's a little more than what we raise for our church discretionary fund each year. It's not a small amount. It can do a lot of good. So I know the poor and hungry in our community have real needs, and I sympathize with Judas's point. But here in the Gospel of John, a different economic point is being made. Jesus does not dispute the needs of the poor. He does not suggest the poor should not be tended to. What he does is celebrate the resurrection of Lazarus. It's as if he's waiting for us to realize it's gonna happen again. He allows himself to be thanked and honored. He allows himself to experience fellowship. He points out that Mary has done a good service for him, and he defends her, saying, "You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me."
I think you're bumping it.
Oh. Okay. Now, Mary may not have known that Jesus was soon to be crucified and resurrected, but she recognizes the importance of Jesus' presence. She honors Jesus' presence by anointing him. And in this act, she proclaims that whatever else is going on in the world, whatever needs there are in the world, it is good to stop and recognize the goodness of God in the moment. It's a proclamation of action, not words. And Jesus does not refuse it. Jesus says that what she does is important, at least as important as caring for the poor. Because what Mary does is recognize Jesus' love and service to those around him. She recognizes and responds to his service in relationship to him. She shows him honor and respect with an anointing that fills the whole house with its smell. Caroline Lewis spoke about this passage on a podcast. And in that podcast, she pointed out that Mary and Judas have different relationships with Jesus. Mary is honoring Jesus as a distinguished guest at a party after raising her brother from the dead. She is recognizing Jesus as the life. She is recognizing Jesus' love, but she is also expressing her love and friendship to him in return. Judas, on the other hand, seems to be oblivious to what's happening. They've all just witnessed the unbelievable raising of Lazarus from the dead. And rather than expressing reverence for Jesus, Judas is concerned about how material goods might be used differently. Lewis Lewis argues that Judas's real betrayal is his failure to recognize and his refusal to accept the love that Jesus has for all of us. Judas is so attached to what he sees as the world's needs that he cannot bear real relationship with God. He refuses to hear all of what Jesus has to teach. While Jesus does call us to care for others, recognizing and honoring the presence of God and the love of God in our own lives is just as important. So as we go into this last stretch of Lent, and it always feels like a stretch, right? Let us consider how we express our love for humanity. Let us consider how we express our love for God and how we accept the love of God in our own lives. Let us consider how we accept that love so we can share it. So the world can be filled not only with the sights and sounds, but with that smell of love. An extravagant love that allows us to celebrate God with us. Even as we ponder what God's going to do next, knowing the cross looms just over the horizon.